Dear viewers, I'd like to remind you that today we have the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Christine Arakelian. She is a member of the Armenian Society of Fellows, a business consultant based in Washington, D.C. Christine, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Arthur.
It's a pleasure to have you. So some pretty amazing events happening in Washington. It's been a real roller coaster. Could you start in any order that you would like to pick? Because I don't know where to start.
Look, this has been a very key week. And really the past 2 weeks have been momentous in terms of setting the stage for Trump's priorities in his new administration. Rubio has also taken a number of actions pertaining to the Panama Canal, pertaining to U.S. interest in Ukraine and elsewhere. Trump has made pronouncements with respect to BRICS. Now, Pashinyan obviously has been in D.C. this week, but to be honest with you, it has not caught the attention nor comment of the Trump administration.
Wow.
And I think that the silence is really speaks volumes in terms of where Armenia stands at the moment vis-a-vis the United States. It's not to say that Armenia could not be a priority to the United States, but at the moment it's not.
You know what else speaks volumes is when a state leader visits Washington and he's not even received. There are no official visits, official meetings, and instead he's meeting with religious leaders, and some of them are religious sects, instead of meeting a representative of the Trump administration or of the State Department. That's also very telling. And why did this happen? I mean, we just signed a treaty with the United States, some kind of a charter, strategic cooperation charter with the United States, whatever those words are. So in the end, that didn't even get us a meeting with President Trump or someone from the State Department. They didn't even notice him.
Right. So let's take a few steps back. Pashinyan was on Capitol Hill and met with several members of Congress. I can get you that information after our interview. But at the end of the day, it was a hodgepodge. It wasn't strategic. And it didn't really amount to anything. The key meetings that Pashinyan needed to have in D.C. were with the executive branch. Okay. He needed to secure a meeting with one or more of Rubio, J.D. Vance, Trump. Now, to be clear, the Armenian people do have a channel to Trump. It's Adam Catholicos. Adam Catholicos spoke with Trump during the election. So the $1 million question for the Armenian government is why they would not work with the Armenian churches to secure a meeting with Trump.
I know the answer.
Right. So, right. And that's an issue of pride over strategy. Okay. Foolish. It's not about the personal feelings or resentments of the civil contract party. It's about what's best for Armenia, period. That's how you make decisions. You don't make it based on your personal feelings. So that was a strategic miss by the Armenian government that was quite significant in nature, and sort of puts in front of the Trump administration the fissures within the Armenian community, which are going to diminish Armenian strategic capacity for the United States in the region, given these divisions. But Trump already made his preference clear in terms of working with religious leaders. If you take a look at the election, he was in Michigan meeting with imams. He made announcements with imams on the stage. Okay. Same thing with the Orthodox Church, right? He made a call to Adam Catholicos. Okay, so he's indicating how he likes to communicate with people, because candidly, religious leaders in many ways are more representative and speak with more authority than some of the secular leaders. That's not always the case, but this is an administration that recognizes the power and importance of religion in the public sphere, both in the United States and globally. Pashinyan fundamentally missed that. Let's now turn, though, to the strategic agreement. What was quite notable during Pashinyan's time in D.C. thus far, and to be clear, it's my understanding that Pashinyan's visit extends until the 7th. So we don't know exactly when this interview will air, but there could be developments between the time this interview is taped and tomorrow. Nevertheless, I do not think that Pashinyan will secure any meetings with the Trump administration whatsoever. The reason for that is basically he has nothing new to offer. Everything he had to say or could say has already been said. So what's the point of a meeting? So let's do a recap of the things he's done so far. He's had meetings with diaspora. Those were cherry-picked people to sort of make sure that he didn't really have any tough questions or embarrassing circumstances such that he would be caught off guard. Okay, so that was very carefully orchestrated by the embassy here. He had a discussion at Georgetown. He had discussion at the Atlantic Council. He took out the infographic that the Armenian government put together for Crossroads of Peace. That's the same infographic, by the way, that they've been using for like over a year since it was announced. There's been no progression in terms of what that diagram looks like. It's a bunch of childlike arrows pointing in different directions. But here's what Pashinyan didn't do. He didn't talk about how Armenia can be a pivotal player in stemming BRICS in the region. Trump has already indicated that he is hostile to BRICS, to any initiative that would displace the dollar's global dominance. Pashinyan didn't speak to it. Pashinyan didn't speak to Armenia's good relations with Iran and how Armenia could potentially diffuse what could be an upcoming war between Israel and Iran. Trump made it abundantly clear that he does not want to go to war with Iran. He is most likely going to meet with Pashinyan and try to diffuse the situation, and it remains to be seen how that plays out. But Armenia made no mention of that. Armenia made no mention of Christians and Armenian communities in the Middle East and how they can cooperate with the United States government and governments in the region in basically stabilizing that situation for indigenous Christian populations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So meaning if you're going to be in DC, you don't speak your language, which is Crossroads of Peace. You speak their language and you make it relevant to them. Okay. And he failed to do that. He failed to understand what other people's strategic priorities are and how he can fit into that. Now, the comments that were made on the strategic agreement were made by Ambassador Herbst at the Atlantic Council, as well as other commentators, but none of those people have any traction within the Trump administration, meaning there isn't a single person within the Republican circles who to date has endorsed that document. Okay, so again, that is a huge strategic miss by the Armenian government, and candidly, it cannot be rectified at this point. I mean, I was getting calls from Armenia maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago saying you need to endorse this document, you need to do everything you can. It's not salvageable. And I know people maybe don't want to hear that, but at the end of the day, if this were important to Trump, we'd know by now. There were reports coming from Yerevan that it was a joint project between the Biden administration and Trump administration to the benefit of Armenia. There's no evidence of that this past week. So again, a lot of different misses. It's clear that Pashinyan didn't have meetings lined up. He was attempting to use the IRF conference and National Prayer Breakfast to secure himself more strategic meetings. But again, there's nothing new on offer. And so if I'm JD Vance or Rubio saying, should I meet with Pashinyan? Well, I just watched the interview with Ambassador Herbst. What is there new to learn? Nothing. So why meet? Okay, so that's where I think we are at this moment.
But Christine, don't we have an embassy in DC? I mean, this person was there now for what, 6 years, 7 years, however many years she was there. Why don't we have any contacts with the Trump administration? Why don't we have any contacts with the media, with American media outlets? I understand that they didn't even pick up this visit; they didn't pay attention. Why don't we have meetings lined up? Why is he meeting, sect leaders instead of meeting the representatives of the U.S. government? What was the embassy doing? And why we have a diaspora? We have a very powerful, influential diaspora. Why weren't the resources of our diaspora used? Okay,
so let's turn first to Pashinyan's sort of desire to align himself with evangelicals here in the United States. It's very clear. He's attempting to curry favor with a key electoral base of Trump, the evangelicals, such that his track record for the past 4 years of being a globalist, of being hostile to Trump, can be effectively rehabilitated. Okay? This isn't too different. There was actually a report in the news this morning. There was a Ukrainian delegation at the International Religious Freedom Summit that was undertaking a similar task. They were looking to court favor with evangelicals such that the Trump administration, okay, would favor their proposals. Okay, so unfortunately, this International Religious Freedom breakfast has turned into a political football in which people are jockeying for favor, and this isn't lost on people. Okay, this is well understood. This is well known. Okay, so now in terms of our embassy here, the ambassador and the Pashinyan administration has been very favorable to Biden. That's not like a huge secret. And pretty much people all put their eggs in the basket of Biden during this election. Now, that's not to say that Armenian Americans did not support Trump. I worked in a broader coalition called Catholics for Trump Vance. Catholics for Trump Vance, that was working towards electing Trump. But there were very few to no Armenians involved in that, at least until very late in the game. And that's just a fact. There really were no organizations, Armenian diaspora organizations that were aligned with Trump in the election. So unfortunately, Armenia has not pursued a bilateral relationship with the United States. And that's why Armenia is flat-footed at this moment, okay? The diaspora organizations fundamentally could not secure the meetings that were necessary for Pashinyan and his administration. That's actually a fact. That's why basically Save Armenia and other groups are now stepping up, trying to fill this void. But at the end of the day, what it goes to demonstrate is that there's limits to evangelical influence. Okay, Trump is no fool. He's not completely in the back pocket of any one constituency here in the United States. You can see that because he's pursuing a path of moderation and negotiation with Iran rather than rushing to war. Okay, ultimately, Trump is about the United States, not any key electoral base. So at the end of the day, when people are pushing him to go in one direction in a very extreme way, he's going to react and pull back. And ultimately, Trump is a person who wants to pursue U.S. strategic interest. That definitely includes BRICS. That definitely includes peace in the Middle East. That definitely includes China. That includes Ukraine. And the question is, where does Armenia fit into these larger strategic priorities for the United States? Armenia can't answer that question, hence there's no reason for a meeting.
Can't answer that question, but what could he have said? I mean, surely there must be some interests for the United States in this region. I mean, mainly related to Israel, Turkey, Azerbaijan, the gas, the oil resources, the so-called Middle Corridor, and then, as you say, we were showing this childish infographic with the arrows pointing places. And you're right, we see the same thing now for over a year. Why couldn't an argument be made to the United States that Armenia could play an important role in this region and kind of align itself with Trump's vision of the U.S. interests in our region?
That argument could be made, but it's not being made. So, for example, Azerbaijan is now part of BRICS. Okay? Trump has been hostile to BRICS. He views it as a strategic threat. Okay? I just saw no mention of that from the Armenian government here in DC. Okay? We have something called the Zangezur corridor. Again, and let's not get bogged down on terminology. Candidly, the Crossroads for Peace terminology is awkward and it doesn't really say anything. Okay? It's a result. It doesn't tell you what it actually is. So at the end of the day, there should be a jointly administered Zangezur corridor, okay, by the U.S. and Armenia. That would interest the United States. Why? Because the U.S. realizes the importance of key corridors throughout the world. This is why Rubio has been focused on the Panama Canal, for example. This is why there's interest in Greenland and the Arctic. At the end of the day, with global warming, those Arctic sea routes are going to be opening up. Everybody understands that, okay? So at the end of the day, that's what the U.S. is really interested in. The U.S. needs to secure India as a key partner in its Western alliance. Okay, that's in jeopardy right now. How can Armenia basically facilitate that through Zangezur and India's participation in that region? Because at the moment, India is surrounded by countries that are aligned with Turkey and China, both from a maritime and land perspective. Okay, let me give you a few other things that Armenia could be doing. There is a new trio of countries, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt, that have been working cooperatively to stem Turkey's ambitions in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, this is very important because as Turkey consolidates power, Turkey is getting more aggressive both from a maritime and territorial perspective. That's very clear. Okay, so this cluster of countries has emerged, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, that are stepping up the pressure on Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. Why isn't Armenia working with those three countries to have a land component of a strategy to contain Turkey? That in turn would position Armenia to have better relations with Israel. But again, they're getting bad advice. So the thinking in DC right now for some of these groups is, all we need to do is make Armenia evangelical Zionist, and therefore we'll have a better relationship with Israel. No, that's false. The way to improve a relationship with Israel is to have strategic importance to Israel. At a certain point, okay, and this is the opportunity that Armenia has not been exploiting. Everybody knows that Israel and Azerbaijan are aligned, but there's going to come a breaking point, because fundamentally Azerbaijan is also aligned with Turkey. That tension between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Israel has to be exploited. And it has to be exploited in a big way, because in the minds of many Israelis, the question is, what's that breaking point? Okay? Azerbaijan is too interconnected with Turkey, okay, to simply sever ties. And so as Azerbaijan's economic ties strengthen with Turkey, where does Israel fall into that larger scheme? Yes, Azerbaijan has significant oil exports to Azerbaijan, but if there is a pan-Turkic corridor starting with Istanbul going all the way out into Central Asia, where do those gas and oil exports to Israel fall in the larger scheme of things? Meaning Israel becomes a lesser priority. Hence, okay, that is a strategic threat to Israel, because given the situation in Syria right now, okay, there is going to be increased tension between Turkey and Israel because they effectively now share a border. The United States is looking to basically separate Turkey and Israel and ensure that there's not a conflict, but that's not clear that that is the case. Okay, so again, these are all opportunities for the Armenian government to engage strategically with the United States. All of them have been missed. So, and this has been a multi-year effort. You know, you can't sort of like show up for the final exam and get an A after not doing homework and not doing all your practice sessions for the past 4 or 5 years. Okay, Armenia went all in on a single strategy, which is to align with the Biden administration and effectively follow their directives. We now see that that's reached its limit, because the United States is now going to ask Armenia, what are your strategic interests in the region and how can we help? And if you can't answer that, and you can't make it relevant to the things that people understand, and you continue to talk in a vernacular of crossroads of peace that means absolutely nothing to nobody except you, this is what you see. This is going to be the result. This needs to be a wake-up call. Pashinyan, Makunz, Mirzoyan, they need to go back to their offices in Yerevan, erase everything, and start over.
Speaking of erasing everything, do you think there are any reasons to believe that there may be some tentative agreement around the Zangezur corridor, some pressure may be applied to this leader and this group to make concessions regarding the Zangezur corridor? Because as we look to Palestine and what's happening there, and some unprecedented statements made yesterday by the U.S. administration, we can see that the Israeli influence is very powerful, and Azerbaijan is Israel's ally, and their lobbyists are cooperating. So it would only be logical for Azerbaijan at this point to put forward certain demands, and their chief claim in this region, the most important demand that they have is the Zangezur corridor. Do you think that something may be going on behind the scenes, some kind of an agreement may emerge at some point? Because we also got some news from Europe. One of Euro bureaucrats, I don't remember her name, she said that we would welcome an opportunity for Armenia and Azerbaijan to agree on this corridor. Do you think this is in the cards?
So do I think there could be backroom deals with respect to Zangezur? Your question?
Yes.
But there's no question.
There is no question.
Yeah, I mean, Armenia's not at the table. So let me explain a couple things about Anglo law, okay, that people in Armenia and even in different places in the world don't really understand, okay? So first of all, there's a saying in American law, possession is 9/10 of the law, meaning if you possess the land, you pretty much won your case, okay? No legality can basically undo that. So when you take a look at some of the proposals that were made this week to protect Armenia, okay, they all dealing with legal mechanisms that are retroactive. Okay, how is that actually going to protect Armenia? That means you're coming in a position of weakness. The second thing that you need to understand about Anglo law on property, and this is key because remember, Trump was a property developer, so he may not understand this or articulate this explicitly, but it's important that people understand, okay? So in many other countries around the world, okay, people are incentivized to hold on to their land holdings for as long as possible because the property taxes are kept low. That's not the case here. Property taxes are matched to the real value of the property, meaning if you bought the property 100 years ago and you had it in your family for all that time, but now it's worth a lot more money and you can't pay the property taxes, you're ousted, you leave, you lose the land. Because the highest priority in Anglo law from a property perspective is the proper utilization of that land. It's not you keeping it. Meaning, if Armenia doesn't get moving and attract US investments to that region and the commercialization of that corridor, there's no reason for Trump to care about it, because at the end of the day, I can assure you, Turkey and Azerbaijan will cut a deal with Trump that allows the United States to access rare earth elements in Central Asia, access oil and gas for Europe, etc. That will be beneficial to US and or her strategic allies. Meaning, at the end of the day, this is what Armenia has to do. You have to ask yourself the question, if Armenia is actually aligned with the United States, why are there so few US investments in the most key region of Armenia? Okay? It doesn't make any sense. So these are the things fundamentally that they have to grapple with. Now, in terms of what took place in Gaza this week, and specifically Trump's comments with respect to the annexation of Gaza, yeah, it's problematic because at the end of the day, if one country can annex for their own purposes, why not another?
And ethnically cleanse.
Right. I mean, this is a very, which is, by the way, why it was condemned by all European countries, with the exception of the UK, by the way.
Of course.
And that tells you something because the UK is aligned with Azerbaijan. Okay, so yeah, it's extremely problematic what's taking place. And that example could easily be extrapolated to Armenia, just like the siege of Artsakh was replicated in Gaza in cutting off food, medicine, etc. for multiple months. People are basically taking things up to the limit and see what they can get away with and then pushing it yet even beyond that. That's the mentality in the world today. And so, Armenia sort of clinging to international law and tribunals, it's not going to cut it. I mean, at the end of the day, that is a weak mechanism to enforce your rights.
So you think there may be some backstage discussions or deals regarding Zangezur, and we basically we're not in a position to oppose it because there are no U.S. interests in Syunik or Zangezur.
Correct. So look, I've negotiated deals all over the world. Okay, by the time you get to a negotiation, the deal's done. The most important thing for negotiation are the pre-negotiations, because everybody walking into the room has already basically made their position. They've traded everything. So in other words, when you go to a big meeting or a big conference or something along these lines, by the time you get there, everybody's made up their mind. Okay, so that's actually the way things work. Now, Armenia has no real engagement on economic issues in huge parts of the world. Zangezur comes down to money. Therefore, yes, of course, Armenia's cut out of it because they don't really have anything. They have not put anything on offer yet that's of value to anyone. Okay.
And Trump said recently that he was going to extract certain resources from Ukraine. I just heard it today that they were interested in some rare minerals in Ukraine. So he's very much a businessman, right? I'm glad I made you laugh. I mean, this is good, right?
Look, if I didn't laugh, I'd cry. Okay.
I know.
Laughing because it's funny that he's running around the world saying, if you want military assistance from us, you're going to give us the rare earth elements.
Right.
Okay, it's just so as Doug McGregor said, basically the rare earth elements in Ukraine are east of the Dnipro River.
Yeah.
Meaning
Russian populated areas.
Right. He didn't get the geography right. But let's leave that aside. It goes to show you the mentality.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Trump wants a win. What big win? And people and now Armenians are trying to respond to that, and they're saying, let's have him awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Sorry, that's they want big strategic wins. Nobel Peace Prize smacks of Obama. Remember, Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm sure that Trump would welcome Nobel Peace Prize, but maybe get it for bringing peace in Palestine and Israel and that region. Okay, because Armenia is not going to secure peace without peace for the wider region. Armenia is downstream from some of the larger issues in the region, meaning you can't really solve Armenia as a standalone. Like Russia has strategic interest in the Caucasus in the Middle East. How is the US going to respect that? Okay. This is important too. So one of the discussions that Rubio had in the past 2 weeks, there's a interview that he did, but he was talking about basically it is a multipolar world. This is really the first time that the United States government, through its State Department, has acknowledged that the world is multipolar and other countries have interest. And we need to basically work within that multipolar order. If you recall, during the Biden administration, it was all about international order, going back to World War II. Now, I don't want to say that whole thing has been unraveled yet. It has not. We're sort of like in an in-between phase. But in other words, like Armenia is positioning itself vis-a-vis the United States in such a way that it aligns with Biden's worldview versus Rubio's new multipolar view. Okay? There's going to be an expectation that Armenia gets along with all of its neighbors. Okay? That's just a fact. This notion that Trump is going to support a relationship with Armenia where Armenia is basically saying, save me from all the neighbors, that's just not going to cut it. Okay? It is a multipolar world. Russia has strategic interest. China has strategic interest. How do we work that to our favor?
Right, that was a great speech. In fact, he was very honest. Not only did he say it is a multipolar world, he acknowledged the reality. He also said we lied to those people by making them believe that they could win against Russia. I think that was very courageous of him to acknowledge that basically Ukrainian people were misled, and they, now lost over 1 million people. 1,200,000 is the latest number I'm getting.
Well, so there's something else coming up too.
Okay.
It's all but assured that the United States is going to be announcing the withdrawal of its troops from Syria. So now this goes back to the first interview that we did with Doug McGregor, where we said, look, if the United States is fundamentally not going to be aligned with the Kurds in northeast Syria, what does that say about the prospects for Armenia? Okay. I spoke with somebody yesterday at length who most likely will be serving in the Trump administration shortly. And basically he said that exact point. He said, look, if the United States is withdrawing from Syria, what does that say? Like the United States cannot be involved in every single little component of everything going on in the Middle East. I think there's a recognition that we have to sort of focus on the big stuff, okay, and leave the other stuff to the local local players. Okay, so again, let's put this in the framework of Armenia. What's the big issues in the region? It's not crossroads of peace. It's BRICS. It's the battle for influence and economic control between the United States and China. That's where crossroads of peace comes in. It's fitting within a larger framework. Okay. So again, that's really important. I mean, these are all sort of like red flags for Armenia as they're going along that are being ignored. Okay. If the United States is withdrawing from Syria, that tells you something. Now, it doesn't mean that Armenia cannot be a strong strategic partner to the United States. It certainly can, but it has not really made the case. Let me say one other thing too, and this has taken the attention of people in DC. Okay. So Pashinyan says he's Western aligned. He hasn't withdrawn from CSTO. There's no formal withdrawal. Okay. He's part of Eurasian Economic Union. He says he doesn't want to be a part of BRICS. Putin invites him to the BRICS meeting in Kazan, Russia. He goes. So, at the end of the day, this is appearing to people in the West as basically a level of incoherence. Now, you could say, well, okay, but we have a EU mission here, and they're observers, and they're watching the border, and those are all weak indicators of interest. Military training for humanitarian purposes is not the same thing as being a member of NATO.
Absolutely
okay?
right.
So,
absolutely right.
I mean, at the end of the day, like everything that Armenia is getting is very weak and soft. And there's a reason for that, because Armenia doesn't want to be hard in terms of the decisions that it's making. It wants the best of all worlds, so basically it can go in any direction it wants, depending on what happens. That's not lost on people, okay? You want to be out of Russia's orbit? Do it, pull the plug. But don't equivocate and then basically say you're pro-Western. Now, again, I'm putting on my hard-nosed US hat. I understand that someone sitting in Armenia watching this interview might be alarmed and saying Christine's not doing her best to support Armenia. But supporting Armenia starts with understanding how other people view it. Okay? At the end of the day, if you're disengaged from how other people are viewing you, you're not really doing your job, because you have to speak to people's perception. Okay? You can't expect that everyone's going to work within your framework, within your rubric. That's not really the way the world works. That's not how deals are cut. That's a very unrealistic notion of how the world works.
I quite agree that this policy, if there is a policy, has been seen as very incoherent, and not just in the West, in Moscow as well. It raised some eyebrows in the West, it raised some eyebrows in Moscow. I think what they're trying to do is have a balanced policy, but they are not really succeeding. The Russians have been telling them for a while, you're just trying to sit on two chairs. And I think we kind of fell in between, because to sit on two chairs, you have to have a big shoulders. Our neighbors seem to be succeeding in that. Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have very independent foreign policy, and they're, partners with Russia and partners with the West. But we can't seem to make this one work. But returning to what you said, read the regional context, very important question. So do you think that there will be some tough negotiations with Iran, and the plan to attack Iran is shelved for now? Because I've heard some pretty aggressive statements from Pompeo. I think a couple of days ago he said that this is the time to strike. And of course, Lindsey Graham, I confused him with Lindsey.
No, it's okay.
It's a really funny slip of the tongue, right? She's an actress who lived in my neighborhood. Anyway, so he said that, yeah, this is a convenient time. We've got to use force. You can't negotiate with Iran. Iran is Hitler. It's a fascist state. So you think that Trump is managing kind of to temper those feelings, and is going to negotiate? Probably is going to be a tough negotiation, I think.
Yeah, so I'll tell you my reading of what is taking place. Okay, it's no big secret that there were massive donations to the Trump campaign from a variety of Jewish Americans. This is no big secret. Okay, they have a lot of influence. Okay, this is the most pro-Israeli government perhaps that the United States has ever seen. Okay, I think that's a fair statement. So at the end of the day, Trump has to kind of reward this key constituency, as well as some of the evangelicals who are aligned with the Israeli lobby. Okay, so what do? You say, okay, you're going to annex the West Bank, no problem. That's coming. Okay, let's depopulate Gaza. Let's strong arm Jordan and Egypt and force them to basically take in all the Palestinians. Now, just as an aside, Okay, that was a huge, huge error. One of the things you never do in that part of the world is make people lose face.
Yes, that's right.
What does he say? Right. What does he say publicly? I own Abdullah because basically we give him money. He's weak. He's going to do whatever I want.
That's very bad. Very bad. In any part of the world.
Right. You just made the argument to Abdullah's enemies on why he is a tool of the United States and needs to be overthrown.
That was a very
Trump
bad
just
faux pas.
agreed with them.
That was a faux pas.
Same thing with Sisi, by the way. Egypt is a great civilization. Okay. It's not just a country. It's a civilization. You don't make people lose face publicly. So he did that. So now returning though to Israel. Okay. So Trump is effectively saying to Israel, we'll give you everything you want for your greater Israel project, right? In Syria, West Bank, Gaza, etc. We are sending you 2,000-pound bombs, use them. You want to kick out the UN? No problem, right? Israeli settlers, we're not going to sanction you anymore. Okay, so he's giving them everything. But Trump is basically putting the line in the sand. He's saying, I'll give you that, but I'm not going to give you Iran. I'm going to go on a peaceful route. So he made a statement on Truth Social yesterday to the effect that he wants to negotiate with Iran, that he is upping sanctions on Iran. Now, why is he doing this? He's doing this to put pressure, maximum pressure on Iran so that they come to the negotiating table. And guess what? The Iranians effectively reciprocated. They said, yes, we want to do this. So now what's happening is Israel saying, oh, we don't like this because now is the time for Israel to lock in long-term gains. Okay. How are they going to lock in long-term gains? They're going to basically, they're looking to go to war with Iran. They don't want to do it alone. They need to do it with US support. They know that. So the way this is going to play out is whether Israel can effectively come up with a pretext for making strikes on Iran, which effectively would tie the hands of the United States. Trump is trying to get ahead of this and saying, I'm going to sit down with Pashinyan, we're going to negotiate, we think we can get a deal done, etc. He's doing that preemptively to basically tell the Israeli lobby in the United States, don't go there, don't go there. Now what you see in the background are different politicians in the United States, some of whom are more or less aligned with AIPAC, but who have different viewpoints on it. You have those who are very hawkish saying, let's attack Iran now, i.e. Pompeo. Then you have others saying this is crazy. But the strategic backdrop to that is effectively the quid pro quo with Israel regarding Gaza, West Bank, Golan Heights, etc., their annexation, and basically saying, okay, but here's the red line for the United States. The question for the United States now is, can they hold the line? And what is Israel going to do to make sure that the United States cannot hold the line? That is the dance that is taking place behind the scenes that, candidly, neither of us have visibility to, but that's going to determine for where things go in the greater Middle East. Now, the question now is, the Arab states have repudiated what Trump proposed. And this, again, is another colossal blunder. It's the very beginning of his administration, and he is already confirmed the worst doubts, of the moderate Arab states in the Middle East. Why? By the way, there's an Arab group that supported Trump in the election. It's called Arab Americans for Trump. And literally right after Trump announced this plan to annex Gaza, they changed the name of their group to Arab Americans for Peace, basically disassociating themselves with Trump. So he's lost credibility with these groups. Now, it's my understanding Trump has an upcoming trip to the Middle East. I think he's going to see Gaza, Israel, and then Saudi. But Saudi is not going to capitulate. Okay, Saudi's the 800-pound gorilla. They're not going to capitulate. Okay, they basically view themselves the leader of the Sunni Arab world. They have Mecca, Medina. They have responsibilities, not just as a nation state. They have responsibilities to Islam and Arabs overall. So they're not going to basically back down off of that.
I agree with you. I think he kind of fell on his face, didn't he, right from the start. And how is it even conceivable? How is it imaginable that the US, the United States of America, is going to move 1.5 or 1.8 million Palestinians out of their native land to build a French Riviera, as he said? Does he think this is like Dana Point or like where does he live? What is it called? That place in Florida where he lives. He thinks he can just kind of clear them out.
Let me comment on this. Trump's not the only one who has made these idiotic comments. Okay, Tom Friedman did too. Tom Friedman wrote an article in the New York Times basically saying that if the Palestinians really wanted to, they could have been Abu Dhabi. So here, let me tell you what this thinking is, okay? Oh, God, the Palestinians have a prime piece of real estate on the water. And I've been to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Look at what they did, all the high rises and glitzy things. And that's what we should do for Gaza. And then everyone's going to be happy. We'll let a couple Palestinians back in. They'll be displaced, but that's okay. These are people who are utterly naive. I've been all over the Middle East countless times, okay? Bedouins want to be Bedouins. They don't want to move to the big city, okay? You have to go into small villages and communities to see these indigenous communities and how they actually want their culture. They want themselves. They don't want Abu Dhabi moving to Gaza with big high rises and a glitzy waterfront where Trump and other people can toast people and all the regular people are basically cast aside. All you need to do is look at the dispute that Saudi Arabia had with its Bedouin tribes in the development of Neom on the Red Sea. Go look at it. The people there don't want to move. They don't care if Neom is the most glitzy, most wonderful resort in the world. They want their land. That's the way they think. Okay, so it was so utterly tone deaf. And by the way, this is what you get when you have American foreign policy decided by people who've only been to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Riyadh. They don't actually understand the region.
It's pretty amazing. And another major issue is Trump has been dropping hints that some discussions are underway with Moscow regarding the Ukraine crisis. What is the latest on that? Because that clearly is a central issue. It's a central conflict in the world today. And is there any hope that this war will stop? This massacre of hundreds of thousands of people will stop, and some kind of a peaceful resolution would be found, and on what terms?
So I'm sorry, Arthur, you broke up there for a minute and I didn't hear exactly your question. So if you don't mind repeating it, I would appreciate it.
Of course. Another major conflict, not in our region, but in Eastern Europe, is the conflict in Ukraine. Also a very important conflict, and Trump promised to stop it in 24 hours. Of course, it was just an election campaign promise. But are there any discussions currently? I mean, he seems to be saying that he is talking to some people in Moscow. Are there any discussions going on? And approximately what tentative agreement can the two sides come to? It seems to be pretty important.
So look, I think the key thing with resolving the Ukrainian conflict is going to be a meeting between Trump and Putin, okay? Kellogg is basically the special envoy to Ukraine and the point person for resolving these issues. But at the end of the day, we can see this time and time again. Trump likes to assert control over the negotiations. Whatever you say could be undercut by Trump 2 seconds later. Okay. The Gaza proposal wasn't even vetted by his senior advisors.
That's a good thing.
Okay. Only a couple of people knew about it, and basically, ta-da. So at the end of the day, anything taking place right now, and to my knowledge, there's nothing taking place right now. It's going to be deferred until a meeting between Trump and UAE. The last time I checked on this, which was several days ago, there's talk of Saudi and or UAE brokering the talks between Putin and Trump. So we have to see how that develops. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, like this discussion of it's going to be resolved in 24 hours, that's no longer the case. The question is whether it'll even be resolved in 6 months. Okay, we don't really have a strategy on Russia. This is our big problem right now. Okay, so we're in a multipolar world. They have legitimate interest. Okay, what are they? What are those interests? What are our interests? And moreover, to have a sensible policy on Ukraine, you actually have to look to the wider region, which is, okay, is our policy on Russia containment? Okay, then let's look at that from the Arctic. Let's look at that in Ukraine. Let's look at that in Asia. Let's look at that in the Middle East. But we're not looking at it that way. We're taking a look at Ukraine in isolation. And moreover, should we have a policy of containment on Russia? Okay. Or is there another way to work with them in a multipolar world in which our interests are aligned? So again, going back to Armenia, Armenia could be a bridge to better relations with Russia for the United States. Okay. How are we using that? Armenia could be a bridge to better relations with Iran. How are we using that? We're not. We want Russia to be the enemy. And fundamentally, I think the Trump administration over the next 4 years will be veering away from that because it's yielded very little result for the United States. Now, I do think the minerals and the farmland in Ukraine are going to be of key strategic importance to the United States. But I do think there's going to have to be a recognition that Russia is not giving up any of the land that it's taken so far. And this is an existential question for Russia because in part, and this is the bigger point that I want your listeners to understand. Okay. When Biden allowed this war to take place between Ukraine and Russia, what we're essentially saying to Russia is the following. Okay. All countries in Europe will be Western aligned. Russia will not be a part of Europe. These are things that go back hundreds of years. Okay, so the idea that Russia is going to be ejected from Europe, okay, if it has no legitimate interest in Ukraine, okay, in the breakaway Republic of Moldova, okay, etc. Well, guess what? That means they're not a European power anymore. Does Russia deserve a Black Sea port? Or should the West basically control all of the land surrounding the Black Sea such that Russia is ousted? Because that was actually a key policy of the Biden administration. Okay, now it's backfired. Georgia, a number of years ago, was more Western aligned than it is now. The new port in Georgia is being built by the Chinese. It's not being built by the West, meaning everything that the United States has done to alienate and isolate Russia has fundamentally backfired. And Georgia is basically a key example of that. That's what people need to understand.
I totally agree with you there. I think it could be a historic opportunity for Armenia to do what it did for centuries, to be a bridge between the East and the West, between Russia, the United States, between Iran and the United States. This is something we're good at, even being a very small country, but given our diaspora, given our talent for trade, creating connections, economic connections between countries. This could be a golden opportunity. But for that, you need an intelligent leadership. You need intelligent diplomatic representatives around the world who know how to do this, and they clearly don't.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
This is very important. So there's been discussion in DC, and I can't tell you with whom, but in other words, Georgia has come out with a very hard line of anti-LGBTQ. This is a key point for the Trump administration, both domestically and from a foreign policy perspective. One of the biggest reasons they're completely dismantling U.S. aid across the globe is because of USAID's insistence that it promote LGBTQ in literally every country in the world. All of that will be stripped bare, okay? So unfortunately, Pashinyan basically gave countenance to these types of programs in Armenia, okay? And Georgia has not. And so notwithstanding Georgia's strong relationship with Russia and their tilt towards Russia, there's some discussion in the United States that Georgia could be a preferable partner, okay, to the United States in the Caucasus because they're willing to take a hard line on some of those issues. Armenia is not, okay? Georgia stands by its church, its Orthodox church. Armenia does not. So now that doesn't get into Georgia's relationships with Turkey. Okay, there's close military connections between Turkey and Georgia, etc. But they're not looking at it from that perspective. They're looking at it as Georgia is culturally aligned with the United States. We need to revisit Georgia. Okay, so again, Armenia doesn't even resonate with people in the United States on that. Okay, again, another strategic miss for the Pashinyan administration.
So my last question is, I was pretty shocked to see these images of the leader of this group, supposedly a leader of a state, meeting with leaders of religious cults in Washington. One of them is a well-known religious cult that has 200,000 followers in Armenia, and there were some other, not all of them were cults, but some other evangelical organizations, pretty extreme views, I understand. Is this just a marriage of convenience, or is there going to be a payout? I mean, if they're going to help this so-called embassy and this regime get access to Trump, that's not going to just end there, right? They're going to try to get something in return. They will probably want a say in directing Armenia's foreign policy. And I understand there's going to be a Congress in Armenia. They're going to come to Armenia. So are we going to see kind of an invasion, religious invasion here, and a war declared on our church, on the Armenian church?
So let's talk about that, okay? I think these groups basically either explicitly or implicitly promised access to Trump by virtue of being a significant block of Trump's constituency here in the United States. The problem is that they failed. As of now, there's no meeting with Pashinyan or anyone in Pashinyan's administration with anyone in the Trump circles, period. So the question is whether Pashinyan doubles down and says this is my only route forward, or he basically steps back, reconsiders, and says maybe there's a better way. Okay? It really depends on how he views this most recent trip to DC and what his takeaways are. Okay? But I think what's pretty clear is that some of the key groups he's been relying on have not delivered and cannot deliver. And the question is he going to realize that sooner rather than later, or double down? That, at the end of the day, is what it comes down to. Pashinyan never struck me as religious one way or another. It's all political opportunism. Okay? So, the question is, how is he going to view the situation at this point? I think he'll do what's best for him. I don't think he's looking at through the prism of what is best for Armenia. I think he's failed to understand how the Armenian church is an asset to the Armenian people, a core part of our history, and an asset in the region. And again, I think the discussion that's taking place in some circles in DC, comparing Armenia to Georgia, and Georgia's strong stances on some of these social issues of our time and Armenia's silence, okay, doesn't bode well in his favor. Now, in terms of influence on foreign policy, if you can't deliver on anything in DC, I think your influence is going down. But there could be another angle, which is, well, you haven't done enough. You need to prove even more you're in Trump's camp, okay? And there lies the problem. As I said to you in a different discussion we had, nothing is for free in DC. Nothing, okay? So the sooner you realize nobody's doing it because they care about you, everything in DC is about money and power.
Oh,
that's what you have to understand. And so at the end of the day, even people who have issue advocacy, you scratch beneath the surface and you basically realize the huge economic interests lurking beneath it that were undisclosed. Now, I'm not going to get into that on this call, but all you need to do is look at the economic interest of various people in DC, and you understand clearly what is going on in a way that's much better understood and more rational than all this talk on rights and freedom and all this other stuff.
Right.
So at the end of the day, yes, everybody collects their paycheck at the end of the day. It might be now, it might be a year from now, it might be 2 years from now, but everybody wants their check. And key thing for Armenia is to stop being naive. And number two, to basically ensure that is transparent and visible. Armenia is a democracy, shouldn't be cutting side deals in his foreign policy. You want to have a certain foreign policy, you come out, you articulate it, you defend it, you make it open. That's what real democracies do. So we shouldn't have hidden agendas, hidden influence, economic interests that are undisclosed. It all has to be transparent. And that goes to the US government's insistence that Armenia create greater transparency. Armenia has been backsliding in global rankings of transparency and freedom and free speech. Okay, that's a key indicator that things are not going in the right direction. Okay, so that's what we need to work on as far as the Armenian people. And everything I say is really for the benefit of the Armenian people. I want people to understand that a lot of thought has gone into Armenia's position in the world today. I want people to understand what's taking place, and I want people to have hope. Because notwithstanding the most challenging circumstances, and I said this in one of my posts, when God closes a door, he opens a window. Armenians have to look for the window, okay? And I encourage all Armenians to basically do that, because there's nothing that's ever set in stone unless you make it so. It's better that we deal with reality the way it is, okay, and judge accordingly and change accordingly, than to be led down the primrose path to a future that doesn't exist. Let's all work together to basically build the future that we want for Armenia.
I think that's an excellent way to end this conversation. I just remembered one last thing I wanted to ask, if you want to answer. Was anyone in the audience, there were a lot of people from the diaspora, was anybody bothered by the fact that this person said that the genocide issue was only relevant because Russia wanted to make it relevant? Did anybody say anything to him? I mean, these are the descendants of the genocide victims. I mean, was there anything communicated to this person?
I don't have any specific knowledge on it, Arthur.
Right.
It's I didn't really pry into it. I know that Pashinyan was very sensitive to it. And so I can't really tell you what took place in some of those private conversations. I don't have the knowledge.
Okay, then we'll probably want to include it. All right, Christine, thank you very much. It was great talking to you, and hopefully we'll see some positive developments we can discuss.
Thank you. Okay, I enjoyed our time.
Thank you so much.